Great. So yeah, we'll get started. My name's Kathryn Williamson. I am a physicist by training. Physics education research was my dissertation topic, and I taught astronomy and ran a planetarium for several years before jumping into consulting, prompted by a family move to Huntsville, Alabama. So that's where I'm calling in from today. And I did not realize before I moved here that Jimmy Wales, founder of Wikipedia, is from Huntsville. So it was my local bookstore here that had this Seven Rules of Trust book. And since I've been working with the Science Trust Project for a couple years now, I picked it up because I was like, oh, I think about trust all the time now and how to build trust. And so I was like, I'm gonna read this book. So happy to be doing a book discussion today. I'm curious what you all thought. If you read it, it's okay if you didn't. I'm going to summarize a lot of kind of key points that stood out to me. And so we'll just dive in here. And you can unmute or put in the chat if you trust Wikipedia. And I saw your reflection questions of what something a person or organization did to strengthen your trust in them. I see a lot of themes that come up in the book and your responses already. Um, but yeah, do you trust Wikipedia? Do you turn to it as a trusted resource? I know when a lot of colleges and universities don't allow Wikipedia to be used as a citation for students' papers and so on. Um, so uh, yeah, I'm looking at the chat. I don't know if you, yeah, mostly trust it. Is important. Yeah, maybe it's a good starting place on a lot of stuff, especially on robust articles that aren't maybe brand new that like have been around for a long time. Great. Yeah, and early in the book, he talks about, how when he was in the hospital with his wife when the birth of their child that was having an issue, there were only like medical journals about this issue or like random threads on internet forums. And so he really wanted Wikipedia to be this place where a layperson can get started with something. Yeah, a good place to go as a starting place. Great. So he's kind of reflecting in this book. He uses Wikipedia in a lot of examples, but also a lot of other business examples. He references Airbnb several times and Linux and kind of reflects on the history of Wikipedia. That's a lot of people thought it was a joke. Like you're going to allow anybody in the world to edit anything. And he referenced this, like, you see, any user can edit anything. And Colbert joked, is wikiality. Reality has become a commodity. Um, and that was in 2006. So but now, I mean, a lot of times I personally use Wikipedia just, I don't even think like I'm going to use Wikipedia about this. It comes up in a lot of my searching and I use it as a source a lot of times for getting started. And Wales really says that not thinking about something you rely on is the ultimate expression of trust. Like if you don't have to worry about it, that's a real expression of trust. And he reflected that to make Wikipedia work, strangers had to talk to each other. They had to trust that others would not be abusive or uncivil to them. They had to trust that others would not change or erase their contributions without consideration or explanation. They had to trust that others would sincerely listen to what they had to say and really think about it. And they had to trust that even when others didn't agree with them and their views weren't accepted, they would at least be treated fairly. So only if that trust between volunteers was established, only if there was internal trust, could Wikipedia even get off the ground. So I like it's a little bit long, but I like that quote because it shows all the different layers and directions of trust and just Wikipedia. And I think in a lot of what we do in physics and science communication, we're doing similar things. We're asking people to trust us and we're telling them we'll give you the benefit of the doubt. We'll treat you fairly. The book begins and ends with this trust in crisis, a lot of different statistics and reflections on this, and he tries to ultimately end with some positive hope, so we'll get there. But I think we all feel this. He reflected on a few different studies that kind of compared about 20 years ago to just a few years ago, that Americans who trust the federal government, that has dropped significantly since then. This is percentage. A great deal or fair amount of trust, people who give a great deal or fair amount of trust in the news media has also dropped quite a bit over those 20 years. And the number of people who agree most people can be trusted has also dropped. So I think we all feel that, in living in this society, we can sense that, and the data backs it up. So Wales dives in with the triangle of trust, which basically is trying. It's all about the question, can I rely on you? And the three corners of the triangle are authenticity, which is what do you think? What do you say? How do you act? Like what's real? Empathy, do you care? Like are you coming at this with kind emotions and good intentions? Do you want people to succeed and do you want to truly understand the other person and really listen to them and find, maybe common ground or something, a way to move forward? And then logic, like, are you really going to do what you say you're going to do? Are you competent? Do you have the capability? Is the follow through he comes back to over and over again at the end is you have to deliver. And he references Francis Fry from the Harvard Business School saying every single time trust exists, these three things are there. And every single time it's broken, I can trace it back to one of these three. So, and I was kind of reflecting, maybe this would be a good thing to talk about in discussion too, is if you can think of a time one of these things was missing, and how that impacted your situation about trust. I also recently learned from the Science Trust Project, and thank you to Jen, who's here, about the ABI model of trust, which is kind of similar. Ability, which I guess would be kind of logic, or authenticity. Benevolence, that would be empathy, and integrity, also about maybe that's your authenticity of like, do you really mean this? And Jen provided a few references on that, and I can always share these. So there's a lot of great research out there. These weren't necessarily referenced in the book, but I think but yeah, we can share those afterwards. Okay, so there's 7 rules of trust. We'll dive in. Rule number 1. Trust is won and lost person to person. Always think of trust in these personal terms, no matter what scale you're working at. And this is one he comes back to a lot as well of maybe you run a huge business like Airbnb or something, but like the way Airbnb works is that people are one you're going to go stay at somebody else's house. You have a lot of personal interactions that make it work or not, even if you have a large scale effort. So, and he asks, how exactly do we decide to trust? A lot of times it is in the moment, one-on-one. It's something we just feel. It's not necessarily like we've made a pro and con list most of the time. And we may not even ask ourselves, like, do I trust this person? Why or why not? It's something that you feel at a gut level a lot of times. And there's that issue of scale. I mentioned Airbnb, but also he talks about Uber several times. Obviously, Uber went through a time where a lot of people weren't trusting it. There were a lot of problems with Uber. And at that time, they reflected everybody was embarrassed to work there. And if the Uber drivers think Uber doesn't care about them, that's an empathy problem. What's the empathy solution? How will Uber show drivers it really does care about them? Until you can answer that, you won't win the trust of drivers. And I believe that was the Harvard, let's see, I believe that was Francis Fry who came in and helped Uber kind of build more trust within their business and kind of come back a little bit from that. Rule number 2 is that people are born to collaborate and connect and collaborate, work with human nature. So Wales writes, extrinsic motivations are unnecessary. If people believe what they're building is important or amazing or just plain cool, they'll move mountains. And he reflected on the beginning of the internet with Linux and Web 2.0 is big, it's wonderful, the future is bright. There was an overwhelmingly positive tone that the internet would be amazing. And he said news stories kind of dropped that many years ago. you know why, everyone does. The internet took a dark turn. So there's this kind of, I feel, I think we all feel this tension between like good and evil. Like, is humanity really good or are we really evil? And, how can we support the good and avoid the evil? Or why is so much human history brutal? And actually, in the book, Wales talks about right here in Huntsville, the 1904 story of Horace Maples, a black man who was accused of a crime that he didn't commit, and a mob absolutely horrifically took his life in with no due process. They stormed the courthouse, and it's this really horrible, dark time when basically a bunch of people here in Huntsville, in Alabama, came together to cause this horrible atrocity, this brutal part of human history. And that really stood out to me. First of all, I didn't know that history in Huntsville. And often I did assume that being pro-social and cooperative was inherently a good thing. So this really challenged my view that it may not be true. Cooperation is just a tool. It can be used for good or it can be used for ill. And so he reflected, like, we've learned a lot about what makes the difference between a barn raising and a barn burning, and that's purpose. So that leads him to rule number three. A strong, clear, positive purpose is essential for people to work together and make something wonderful. So the purpose was a really negative purpose with that collaboration. But if we can harness a positive purpose, what can we do? And so he really emphasizes this tagline, Wikipedia is an online encyclopedia, this very like basic statement that almost seems like why bother emphasizing it. But he says how important it is to boil down the purpose of Wikipedia to this very concrete, recognizable statement that anybody can get behind and understand so that we all know what that means. If you're going to edit Wikipedia, you know that you're trying to make it an online encyclopedia. You have a mental model of what an encyclopedia is. And so when they started the project, everyone kind of knew what to do. And it's even become like a polite way of saying this person has to knock it off or leave if you say they're not here to build an encyclopedia, because that's not aligned with the purpose of Wikipedia. And he reflected on how much that's really simplified things, is having that clear statement. Um, and with community comes identity. There's this phrase, Wikipedians now. There's a whole community of Wikipedians. And they have this identity, and it takes, he says, it doesn't take an organizational psychologist to know that these core elements of any supportive or any sort of collective effort. He also, within Rule 3, he also emphasizes that there are no firm rules in Wikipedia, which is, I think, a little more of a slippery slope. He said that the principles and spirit matter more than literal wording, and sometimes improving Wikipedia means making exceptions. And the spirit of experimentation, innovation, and evolution was baked in Wikipedia from the beginning. It had to be. And he spends a lot of time talking about Wikipedia debates, articles about Wikipedia debates, articles about the rules of Wikipedia and what to do if this, then that, and all of the documentation. So it's there. And he gives lots and lots of examples about people working through issues that are maybe on the margins or maybe unclear about what to do. Um, However, like we all knew what an encyclopedia was before Wikipedia. What if you're building something totally new, which he says was the case for Airbnb, and he said it took years of experimentation for Airbnb to figure out its model. So if you can't even define it, how can you create it? And the developers of Airbnb were figuring it out themselves too. They didn't necessarily have the vision all figured out right up front. However, now that we all know what Airbnb is, others can use it as a metaphor. There's like an RV Easy renting service, and their tagline is Airbnb for RVs. So he talked about the importance of using an analogy and building on what's already known. Okay, rule number 4 is trusting in the power of reciprocity. Want trust, give trust. And later in the book, he references that the Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu, where this principle really originated. And Lao Tzu phrased it, to give no trust is to get no trust. So kind of two sides of the same coin there. So he talked about the history of Quakers and how they were really ridiculed for not being um, like adaptable business people. Like they really what the price was, that's what it is. Like there's not haggling. At the time was like really a strange business practice that people thought would destroy your business if you didn't haggle and push up your prices where you could. But Quakers believed that, honesty is the best policy, basically, trust their customers and be just really open and honest about what their prices are. And he says they did lose some business at first, but eventually they had this really trusted business model where people knew that they were getting what a fair price and what was said was delivered. He also talks about that same perspective of Costco. The one of the, I think, I don't know who Price was. He was maybe a CEO of Costco for a bit, who he said I think was also a Quaker. And his biographer mentioned he would rather lose your business than your trust. So basically, there's built into this power of reciprocity. Like I'm gonna deliver on what I say, and this is what's gonna happen. So that has helped Airbnb as well from their TED Talk. Like if somebody trusts you with your phone in the audience, they say unlock your phone and give it to your neighbor, and you feel like this intense responsibility with somebody's unlocked phone. Like you take that seriously. Um, and he also referenced this game theory, tit for tat game theory, where basically I'm going to treat you as you treat me. This sort of nice guys finish first, like you start nice. If you're not like you're not going to like let everyone walk all over you. If somebody's rude to you or like doesn't do something trustworthy, you're not going to respond, like totally like I still trust you. So there's sort of like this give and take. And I remember I was really taken by the Veritasium YouTube video on this problem. If you ever wanted to reference that, that wasn't referenced in the book, but I thought it was really interesting to just think about like this tit for tat way of life, basically. And in the Veritasium video, they emphasize the importance of forgiveness. Like sometimes, even though you did something that wasn't trustworthy, I will forgive you for it and I will move on. And if it happens over and over, you lose it. But that basically you have tit for tat plus some forgiveness built in, which I thought was interesting. Also related to this is assuming good faith. Um, I know as a science communicator, I've definitely encountered people who just seem like they're trying to rattle me up or something. But if, a lot of times I can see that people are trying to understand something. And to the extent that I cannot criticize their motives, that I can implicitly respect them, and that increases the likelihood that they'll respond in kind. So if you rule out bad motives as a cause of difficult behavior, you have to figure out another cause, which you do by asking questions and understanding the other person's perspective. And you will occasionally waste your time because sometimes people aren't working in good faith. And so there is that built-in trusting others has a risk and sometimes cost. And I think I know that this is something we've really grappled in the Science Trust Project with is this idea of discernment and safety of like when to take that risk and what kind of costs are we talking about? And that's a difficult calculation to make sometimes. Rule number 5 is that we teach tolerance, civility, remember why, and practice what we preach. So in this chapter, he references the subreddit Change My View, which I had never heard of before. Maybe folks on this call have, but they characterize it as civil but frank conversations, and everything gets aired and scrutinized and tested, and people learn and grow. However, he kind of casually mentioned later in that chapter the moderators did have to forbid discussions of topics relating to transgender people. So it's still not a totally 100% pure, healthy place for debate. And I think that shows kind of how difficult some of this can be. He also referenced the wisdom of crowds by a statistician and like had a crowd see if they could guess like the weight of an ox. And most of the time, the average was correct, basically. But in real life, like with a lot of things that aren't just like math and numbers, you really have to talk it out and talk to people. You can't just like survey everybody with no collaboration and really and get there. And he also reflected on some people's who view being nice as being dishonest or even weak, I think. That's like naive and like childlike, I guess, to be to really like trust to show civility and respect. And he mentioned like the Usenet platform that kind of took that perspective where many insisted that you need radical candor, like totally unfiltered, and it's a boxing match, competition, like you can say anything, like you can attack the person if you want, like no rules, like just let it all out because if you don't, then it's going to fester. That's kind of the perception. And this was also held by Linus from Linux. And he said, I'm not going to buy into fake politeness. People resort to nasty things if they're forced to act out if they're forced to behave this like civil way. It's unnatural, and that's just going to lead to worse outcomes. But in the book, Wales says like people were leaving Linux left and right after that, and people, especially like minorities, like women, are the first to go because it's just like I'm not going to be in this environment. So he contrasted that with Python, where they say Guido van Rossum says if leaders are rude to others, it will attract people who either share that attitude or at least don't see a problem with it. So Wales kind of comes back to the academic research that shows that incivility really is not effective. It wastes time. People don't feel committed to the organization, and they may even be less creative. So he talks about the importance of having rules and enforcing them, that you really need to, like Wikipedia has a lot of rules for this reason. And Wales really emphasizes how important it is to make sure we do allow space for disagreement. It's how we learn about each other. So disagreement in and of itself, even if it gets impassioned and emotional, is not uncivil. He talks about kind of ad hominem comments where you're attacking the person rather than the concept. But you can say really passionate things in a respectful way. So that's where that respectful and real comes in. Like you don't have to be a robot with no emotions. You can be totally real with what emotions you're having and still be civil and productive. And I kind of know like this does feel a little touchy. I know like there's been a lot of like there's a lot left unsaid, I think, about like historical marginalization, civil rights, civil disobedience. So I think thinking about civility, we can work to bring those historical precedents in a little more. Okay, rule number 6 is you have a mission, stick to it, don't take sides when in others pursuing their own missions. And he talks about the hidden costs of taking sides, particularly for scientists. And he says, most people trust science, but why? Because we trust scientists to do what they're supposed to do. We trust them to investigate scientific questions and report what they find. So I guess he talked about when scientists or when science organizations like the journal Nature endorsed different political candidates in 2020, that they were able to study that a few years later and what impact did that have. Basically, there was little sign that it convinced anyone to vote any which way, and it lost trust. So he talked about organizations versus people, and like people may have, causes that they care about and stuff, but kind of doing that separately from the organization. And he said something like a university, you know, could take sides on an issue that affects the university, like free speech. So a university would be a place where free speech happens. And so something like that it also feels a little bit like slippery slope. You've got to take it one step at or like case by case. He also noted that once you start taking sides, not taking sides can look like taking sides. So that's also something to keep in mind. Um, and again, he really emphasizes several times in the book that reasonable people can disagree and that even about some very heated issues, like there are reasonable ways to think about it. He said, count on it, get comfortable with being on with honest disagreement. It's essential. And that there is no way around deciding whether a source is trustworthy or not. There's no way around it. Judgment is unavoidable. So, and he talked about uh, the if you really trust your readers, I guess, with Wikipedia, that's where that really impacts. He talked about the a Ukrainian who made an article about the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and it was all very fact-based. Like this happened, this was the date, and the Ukrainian author said, they don't need to say anything negative. They can just or positive. They can just show people the facts and trust that they'll decide what to make of that situation. So that leads us to the seventh and last rule: transparency builds trust, especially when you have something to hide. So just the importance of showing the facts, and if you need to change something, um, change it. He talked about Richard Nixon in like the early days of 1952. He had some scandal about campaign money spending, but he's saying I spent this money in a trustworthy way, basically. And he spent half an hour going through every transaction in his spending and why it was delivered. So he like, kind of overdid it with oversharing, but it really showed like extreme transparency to the point where it's almost downright humiliating, but it builds trust with people at the time. Um, there's also like a medicine campaign. It tastes awful, and it works. And people bought it because they're like, it's fine for medicine to taste awful. They're not expecting it to taste good. And it's transparent. It tastes bad, but it works. And even VW Bug, it's ugly, but it gets you there. People didn't like how it looked, but they're like, it's a good car. So, and that worked. He also talked about in science how damaging it can be for an academic paper to be retracted. Obviously, the academic's reputation takes a big hit, except if the author themselves asked for it to be withdrawn. Then there's not a hit to their reputation, and there's some tentative evidence it might even increase their reputation, where they're kind of building this trust dividend to admit mistakes and correct them and air them out in the open. Um, he also talked about this Pulitzer Prize author in the New York Times, Thomas Friedman, who says, if readers don't trust you, they're not going to read you. If they don't trust you, you're not going to have any impact. Make sure all your facts are right, and if they're wrong, correct yourself and call both balls and strikes. So he talked about like celebrating, the truth, basically, even if it's said by people that you typically disagree with. And so that's also important is admitting when, somebody you've been debating heavily is right about something, rather than just like always going against this or that. And on Wikipedia, they try to be really transparent on certain articles with that have a banner on top. Some articles say the truthfulness of this article has been questioned. They have an article about criticisms of Wikipedia, which I was reviewing a little bit. So again, I think he just emphasizes how Wikipedia tries to be transparent. And that he really emphasizes that you must walk the walk, you must deliver. You can be transparent, but if you're not really going to fix your mistake, if you're not going to do the hard work of following up and really changing your ways from the inside out, then that's not basically building trust. And he used the example of an Airbnb vandalism incident, and the leaders of Airbnb came forward and said, before this, we've been acting corporate, doing what lawyers said and not really taking responsibility. But they expressed a lot of personal responsibility and empathy, but that's still not enough. They had all 200 employees stop what they were doing and brainstorm ways to make Airbnb more trustworthy and more safe. And then they actually started doing those things like ID verification and so on. Oops, I think we went back. Okay, so here's just a summary of all the 7 rules, and then he closes with the one that transcends them all, which is really just emphasizing what he already said about you must do what you say you're going to do. You must follow through. And I think that's really important. He says that's the bottom line. Winning trust and keeping it is ultimately about delivering as promised. The rules of trust will not deliver if you don't. So he comes back to reflecting on Wikipedia, saying, do you trust Wikipedia? There was a Nature study in 2005 comparing Wikipedia and Britannica in accuracy. And I didn't know about that study. And he says, you probably didn't either, but that didn't really affect your decision to trust Wikipedia. You don't need to really see like a Nature study. Like you have built that up in yourself of whether you trust Wikipedia or not. And if you use Airbnb, like you have that experience, you have those relationships of how that's worked. And so he just kind of emphasizes that reputation is powerful. It generates more than money. So that brought him back to that sort of even rule number one about how trust is personal. And so it happens in these really small moments and these small interactions, and it has compounding effect. He also talked about how trust can be broken. You can deliver over and over again, but when you stop, then the trust will also stop. So you have to deliver over and over again and not stop. And then he comes back to the dark times we're in where trust is really dropping. There's been a lot of examples of like violence from people's loss of trust, and he gave some examples. And he said that now people who a lot of times we view people that we disagree with as like the enemy. And if somebody is your enemy, you can't work with them. You can't even talk to them. You can only beat them. You can only defeat them. And he wrote like maybe at the polls or worse, or by any means necessary. Oh, and I repeated it there. He talked about different studies about like the loss of trust about trust in government and news media, and the loss if people lose their trust in government and news media, that basically pushes them to this divided and entrenched category where they feel like they could never understand the other side. And he links this to the rise of social media, saying it appeals to the ugliest with us. It makes us our worst selves. And if there are no shared facts, we'll return to living divided into tribes. By everyone who isn't in the tribe is a heretic and must be crushed. So he says trust is really the heart of the problem. Its loss is both symptom and cause. And he tries to end on this brighter future and calls for bold, persistent experimentation in the words of FDR's depression speech. And also draws on like the software development ideas of getting enough people looking at a bug, then you can fix it. So, you may have your own opinions about that. He says he kind of outlines like 4 ways forward. First is knowing what you've got, basically looking at what we're doing now and saying, what are we doing right now that is limiting trust? How can we make it better? And with every choice we make, we ask, how could this decision affect trust? Every decision can increase or decrease trust. Second, he says, remember that we have more in common. Actually, there's a whole group called More in Common. That's the name of it. And it brings people together across the political divide and to try to find that they're actually, people think the other side is much more extreme than they really are in a lot of cases. So he said that to make this perception gap research more part of public surveys so that can be more in our consciousness of remembering that really and the real people in our lives are usually not that extreme. He also talked about Braver Angels, which is another organization that facilitates those conversations. Third, he says to get excited about technology again. He's very excited about AI's possibility of group decision making and building consensus. And he references a computer scientist, Audrey Tang in Taiwan, who they've done some, I guess, positive experiences with that. And then finally, he just says, talk to people, ask what they think, ask why, and offer to work on something together. So to come together in community. So I was kind of just like Googling, like, what are the criticisms of this book online? Some people say it lacks originality. It's kind of common sense in some cases, too simplistic, superficial, or not rigorous. And he ends with that very optimistic view of AI, which some say is overly optimistic. And I was thinking, well, what do I think? I'm still kind of wondering more on how to repair and rebuild trust when trust is lost. And like when to really stop trusting a person or institution after, we've given that benefit of the doubt, or, like how do when do we say, okay, that's not trustworthy and move on? And I've also been reflecting on the role of the individual versus the group. Um, like, I've encountered people who don't trust me because I'm not from that area or something, or, just because I'm white or something. And like, there's a lot of good reason, historical reason, for people to not trust white women. So how do I navigate that and how do I move, even if I haven't personally like done anything, to this one person or something like, but I represent a group that has. So those are some questions I still have, and I'm excited to dive in with you guys.